Welcome to the Ag Inspo podcast, where we delve into the dynamic world of agriculture, uncovering the stories that inspire, empower, and drive change. Join hosts Rena Striegel and Rabou as they explore the journeys of farmers, entrepreneurs, and leaders who are making a difference as they navigate the critical work of transitioning their operation to the next generation. From navigating family dynamics to developing the next generation of ag leaders, we'll bring you the insights and inspiration you need to thrive in today's ever-evolving agricultural landscape. So whether you're a seasoned industry veteran or just starting out, get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered as we learn from best practices and a few colossal failures on the Ag Inspo podcast.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the podcast, because you take a really interesting segment of agriculture and you're really highlighting and bringing those farmers and ranchers to light. So would you like to just talk a little bit about it and tell us where and how that all got started?
Sure. So the podcast is called Vets in Ag, so VETS in Ag. As a military veteran myself, one of the problems now with the way that the agricultural sector is being communicated to the military veteran is it's too narrow, and it is unintentionally biased, right? It's too narrow in the sense that the thought is, if you did communications in the military, then you can only do communications in agriculture. Supply, logistics. That's it, right? That's all you're suited to do, or that's all the veteran thinks they're suited to do. That's not the case, right? The other sort of challenge is that as a hiring organization, right? If you're a company and you're thinking about bringing an ag company, and you're thinking about bringing veterans in, right? Generally speaking, veterans don't usually kind of bolster themselves up, right? They have a hard time talking about the things that they've done, good or bad. And so they don't always communicate these intangible skills that they've learned and have experienced over their military career that are well suited for agribusiness. And so the podcast, I started it in 2021, was to try to highlight the stories of veterans who have made that transition and are in this space now, who are doing all kinds of things that most veterans don't even know are possible in agriculture. So let's talk to them. Let's have them tell their story. Talk about what that transition process was like for them. If they are in production ag or small scale agriculture, what was that like? What missteps did they make? And so for the audience is really for the veterans who are listening, who are thinking about ag, but also for the folks that are thinking about bringing military veterans on as a potential staff member or employee. Mm-hmm. The two, and this is something that wasn't very clear to me until I really started to hear some of these stories, and we're almost on episode 70 now, so it's been a couple of years, is how similar the environments are, right? Especially during times of conflict, right? Yeah. Military service members they're in decentralized environments. They are often affected by conditions and circumstances that they cannot control or influence. They begin to understand the cultural aspects of different societies and different circumstances. They understand how important a local face is and how trust is in an outsider coming in. And these are commonplace in agriculture. Weather. Oftentimes the farmer makes his own or her own schedule. It's very regional. It is hard work based. It's a meritocracy in a lot of ways. And so because of these different similarities in the environments and because of these softer skills that the military veteran brings, there's a direct transfer over here that I think most veterans and most people don't necessarily think about. And so that's really the whole goal of the podcast, is try to highlight those things, open the door, and just better inform.
Yeah. I think that's really amazing because I know my mother works for the VA and she's a psychologist, and that's one of the things that she talks about quite frequently is, part of the challenge of reentry, particularly after you've been to a combat zone, is trying to find your place and finding your place where it feels safe. And she talks about that frequently, that's one of the challenges of working with returning vets, is just helping them navigate where they could go to find that fulfillment in their careers that also feels safe and somewhat familiar. So I love what you're talking about there, just in terms of the comparison of an experience that a veteran may have to what a farmer may be experiencing or someone in agriculture may be experiencing. So I think that's really cool. I would have never thought about that similarity until you spelled it out, and then it's like, oh yeah, that
Right.
kind of seems obvious.
It's perfect.
Have you ever? So you're talking with the veterans, obviously, but have you done any shows where veterans have gone to work for a corporation or for another farm or something like that, and the effects that veteran's presence has made with that employer?
Ooh,
And
it's a great question. And I wish I knew the sort of final answer to it. So we've had a couple of folks on that work at Seaboard Foods or Cargill, John Deere. And so we've sort of seen how that looks for them and from their perspective, but I've never found out what sort of impact that veteran has had on that particular organization. That would be a really interesting follow-up, and I'd have to go outside of that veteran to figure out how that service members impacted their environment. But I wish I knew. I'd like to. It'd be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I ask is because I think that when you brought up the fact that, the environment in which farmers and veterans work in, there's a limited amount of things that we can control, but the vast majority of the things that affect us mostly are based on things that we cannot control.
Right.
And sometimes I just find that when people can find that commonality, that they can not only help support each other, but they can become more productive and more positive and more insightful and thoughtful about the things that they do, the things that they think about, and maybe some of the varying things that maybe they implement, both from a professional standpoint and from a personal standpoint. Because I think as an ag producer, I mean, that's a real deal. I mean, it's a huge challenge mentally to overcome, to think that you have all of this capital that's at risk, and you basically throw it to the wolves and you say, well, I hope I get it back at the end of the year. And then sometimes for a couple of years, you don't even know what the answer is for that. But at the same time, you have to engage the year that's coming up. So you have all these things that you're trying to juggle and all these mental challenges that are going on. I mean, I think that veterans, if they're in a combat situation, they just go do what they have to do. And I think farmers do the same thing, but there are these other challenges that are so difficult to deal with. I would have to think that it's, kind of the perfect alignment and the perfect relationship where they can really help each other in that regard.
It is 100% a skill that you can learn, how to operate in uncertainty. And so much of what is actually exposed to service members in training is all about how to deal with uncertainty, right? There were countless times in the field and in combat where, at least in training situations, uncertainty is intentionally injected into that training situation such that you're evaluated on how you respond to it. And in combat, it happens all the time. And so it's hard. How do you put down on a resume or a job application, I'm skilled at uncertainty? It doesn't translate, right? You can't write that down. And so
Yeah.
the only way it comes out is through conversation, and it comes out through stories. But those stories don't always come across in job interviews, and the person that's doing the interview, it takes an ear for it. You have to listen for what's being said. And if the veteran can't say, I'm good in uncertain situations and I understand how to operate without specific direction, and I'm an autonomous person, then it can be hard to extract that soft skill and really sort of put it to work. And so that's one of the things we're really hoping to do with the podcast, is just through sheer conversation. That's how veterans communicate best. They just tell story.
Yeah.
And if I can help extract some of those things that are learned from those stories, then it's a win, right? Rena, you made a point about purpose. That comes up in almost every episode that I do. There is this strong and innate sense of purpose that a military veteran has when they're a part of that service and they're a part of that community. It's very clear to them that they're doing something that has a greater purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And when they transition out, that sort of identity in some cases, but that purpose, it's not there anymore.
Yep.
And so in a lot of cases, they bounce around to different professions. They do different things. They move a lot just to try to find that purpose again. And in agriculture, it's so clear. That greater purpose is so obvious and clear that and the environments are similar, and it's hard work based, and they fall right back in love with it again. And they're surrounded by people who are of like mind and salt of the earth, and have similar personalities in a lot of ways to the service members that they worked with. But they don't really know it's out there until they kind of get plugged back into it. So,
I think that's so interesting, because I'm listening to you talk and I'm like, that describes most of the people I work with, in that I'm working with farm owners that are transitioning, they're succeeding those farms to the next generation. And when they get to the end, those final few steps, that describes exactly what they are saying to me, which is, now what? I am losing my identity. I am losing this place of purpose. But I'm not done yet, right? Yeah, physically I'm not done. Mentally I'm not done. And now what? And so we are seeing that huge in agriculture as the next generation emerges to take on leadership and ownership, is now, just like we've got transitioning veterans, we also now have transitioning farmers that are looking for the next thing. And so, just another commonality point between a veteran and a farmer. So
what are they doing? They're not going to a beach and drinking beers in Florida, are they?
No, a lot of them, I mean, quite frankly, they're starting new companies is what a lot of mine are doing. They are experiencing and perhaps even, I should go so far as to say, embracing the fact that they can go do some of those fun things that they've never done. But a lot of them are actually transitioning into another type of company. Most of them have, something to do with ag, or they're lending their years of experience and wisdom to boards and mentorship programs. But very, very few of them are what I would call retiring themselves. They are, they're just taking all that wisdom and expertise and a deep desire to see agriculture thrive and just putting it to use somewhere else.
That's such an interesting comparison. I never thought about it that way, but farm succession is a huge challenge right now.
Yes.
Well,
yeah.
You think about the fact that you said that you wanted to be in the Marine Corps since you were 12. So you've basically aspired to be something your entire life, and farmers are no different. That these kids who grow up on these operations, I mean, they aspire to be like their family. That is, they know inherently that that's what they want to do. And when they do that, I think that while they're doing that, they feel a great sense of purpose. But when they either have to transition out of it, or there could be a whole set of circumstances that cause them to have to leave, or allow them to choose to leave, that really, I think, is upsetting, because they've spent so much time focusing on that identity that wraps them up as a human being, that I'm not sure that they have given a lot of thought to what value they bring to the table outside of this identity that they've wrapped their whole lives in. Yeah. And I think that you giving them a platform to really maybe talk about that and to work that through, and to understand that their value really exists as a human being. It doesn't exist based on only what they did for a living or what they do for a living, but they have value in other spaces. I think it's completely irreplaceable.
Right. The value that they bring to an environment or to a new profession is different than the identity that they had carried, right? Their identity and the value they provide don't have to be the same thing.
No.
And so
no.
Yeah, it's interesting.
For a lot of them, there does have to be an uncoupling of that, which is it can be a very painful discovery process for a lot of people, for sure.
Yeah. Are you finding it more painful if the succession is within? I would suspect it would be more painful if it's sold, or if a son or a daughter doesn't take it over, than if it's transferred internally to the family. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I think when it's sold, the challenge is it's the death of something, right? That is a death. The family no longer holds those acres or that agribusiness. And so that is one set of emotions and feelings that you've got to go through. What I oftentimes see when we are going from an intergenerational transition is that there's a different thing that acquires, right? There's no death, like nothing's dying, it's still there, but we run into two things: that desire to be a part of that next wave of energy. And so there's a reluctance to want to transition because they kind of have FOMO, right? They might miss out on something.
Right.
And so they want to be a part. But then the other piece of that, particularly if the next generation is sort of requiring that there is a physical transitioning out of that business owner, is that they really wrestle with the fact that they're not being needed any longer. And that hits on two fronts. It hits on a professional front as a business owner, but it also hits on the family side, because as a father or a grandfather or mother, there's that uncoupling from their children, which is like, they don't need me anymore. And it becomes a blanket statement of fact, when in fact that usually is not the case. It's just that they've prepared them so well that they're ready for the next level on the business side. But it does not mean that they are not needed on the family side as still that mother father figure, but also as a very active grandparent to these next generation of farm grandkids. And so it becomes really convoluted sometimes, and being able to navigate those things and help people see and to really acknowledge what is actually happening versus what they feel is happening. It can be a little bit of a process to help people with.
Rena, most of your consulting practice deals with this type of transition, does it not?
Yes.
Yeah.
100% of it.
That's what I was like. You're speaking from a place of deep experience here.
Yes. Yeah.
Ron,
but it's exciting though to see these families successfully navigate these types of things. It's really cool.
Right. Ron, your oldest is 13?
My youngest is 13.
Sorry, your youngest is 13.
I have three boys, so they are 21, 19, and 13.
And is there interest there in taking over from dad when the time is right?
There certainly is from the middle one, from the 19-year-old. He's always actually been a huge asset to this farm. And the older he gets, the more evident that becomes. It's hard to tell with the other ones. They have, I have a musician in the family who's extremely excited about music. And, I think that what we have tried to do as parents is we've tried to say, whatever you choose, make it your own. Like if you're going to choose to be a farmer, then embrace that with all the passion that you have. But by all means, don't think that you have to fit in the mold that we have, that we've created, that there's room for you to discover your own way. And certainly that is with the oldest one who's very into music, that I think it's our job to not direct our kids to a particular field or career, but really to empower them to make thoughtful decisions, and to empower them with the ability to understand the value of hard work, to understand the importance of critical thinking, to understand the value of problem solving. Those are the legacy pieces that we can give to our own children. And sometimes I think that gets confused. And certainly I know with the work that I've done with Rena and when I go speak to groups across the country, that this identity piece is a real thing. And we, I think, lose perspective because we're misinterpreting what an actual legacy is. It's not our necessarily our career in the military. It's not our career as a farmer. It's those things that we can actually pass on to our children that empower them to create their own identity, to create their own destiny, to create their own path, and help them to do it in a way that's fulfilling to them as a person.
How do you even go about taking a patriarch, for example, from a family farm, and as that transition occurs, how do you even just say to somebody like that, yes, this thing that used to be your life and your identity is now being transitioned, whether it's in the family or not, but here's how you find your new identity. Like what's even the first step in that conversation? I wouldn't even know what to say in that regard.
Well, hopefully we are getting to people early enough, right? Like the whole industry of succession planning, if you would call it an industry, right, in the last 10 years has just changed unbelievably. 10 years ago, 11 years ago, we were trying to educate what it was and why you needed a succession plan, right? Because that we were still really operating in a lot of ways under the model of farms are inherited, they're not succeeded. So in the 10 years that we've been watching this phenomena change and evolve and grow, we are seeing farmers that are younger and younger coming to the table saying, we're not ready to transition, but we want to understand what it is. We want to understand what it means, and we want to understand what we can do now to get ready for the day that we will be transitioning to our own kids. And typically that comes at a pain point, right? Because there is a difficult or maybe even potentially unsuccessful succession that has happened in the prior transition of that farm. So what we hope is that people will start to think about what comes next while they're still actively building. But for those farms that are kind of on the tail end of that, where they haven't had the benefit of all of this 10 years, we really do educate that is part of the job. Part of the job of desiring that your farm continues for however many, and I always talk about the 100-year vision, is your job is to figure out what's next. Because if you don't, and you roadblock or you pause or you try to control too long, the likelihood of having a 100-year vision actually diminishes. Because
you away, right?
Yeah, you create so much tension and friction in your family that you actually drive successors out of the business. And as we know, farm kids, air quotes around farm kids, are highly sought after in the workplace because of all the things, Ron, that you have taught them. And much like the military professionals, right? They are hard workers, they're good thinkers, they do the necessary, they don't mind getting dirty. They don't have some of those expectations that a non-farm kid has. And so, our farm leaders are highly sought out everywhere, including other farms. And so people will steal them if you don't give them a place to grow and flourish.
Have you ever seen these significant challenges arise out of a piece of, or maybe more generally, technology adoption? I really want to bring in this. Dad says,
yes.
No, you're not. You're shaking your head like, yeah.
Oh yeah. It's one of the tension points, and it has a lot to do with just a life cycle of a human being, is that, a 20 or 30-year-old is coming in with a fervor and an excitement about, creating things and growing things and building. And so their excitement about technology or tools that will help them do more with less is very, very attractive. When we get to the end of a career, we're kind of in that slow down mode, right? We want to ease into the last phase of our life. We want to enjoy the success. We want a little bit, slower pace. We want all those problems to just come down to sort of a dull roar, rather than kind of throwing ourselves into the thick of things. And so when we get that generational tension of a 20, 30, early 40-year-old who's building and acquiring and being heavily driven for success, that crashes into, I want to slow down and have a different pace and have less complexity, we run into the intergenerational war on a farm. And so that's sometimes one of the negotiation points of, what do we adopt and allow that complexity in the short term, while still preserving the peace and maybe some of that tranquility that a seasoned business owner has created for themselves. And so to create harmony around those things is, again, one of perhaps the big challenges. And when farms navigate that well, those are the farms that you see that just thrive, and they're incredibly successful, and they're typically the ones that we see the stories written about. And when farms don't navigate that well, they're the farms that are really seeking the help to figure out how to navigate those things. And but yeah, that is a real tension point, certainly in the world of multi-generational farms.
They're at different places in their lives, just by human physiology, right? And so I hadn't thought about it from that perspective as well, that one is trying to increase involvement and one is just trying to bring all that noise down a little bit.
Well, and even if you think about what was successful for that next generation, the transitioning generation, we have a lot of incredibly successful ag business owners, and I just call farms ag businesses, because that's what they are in my world. But, they became successful because they were incredibly astute at buying farmland when it was not very expensive. Right. And they are now sitting on an empire of wealth. And that was their model of success, right? So a lot of them still in their mind is, we must continue to acquire farmland. The next generation farmer is sitting there going, we can't afford that stuff. So we're going to go over here and we're going to build our wealth on technology or, consumer, whatever it is, but it is not the model of acquiring farmland. So again, this guy says, let's go to farmland auctions and use our resources to buy more farmlands. The next generation is like, are you kidding it? We can't cash flow it. Like, we got to go over here and get the drones. We've got to get the stuff.
We have to make more with we've got to be more efficient with what we have, rather than that's how we have to scale and grow, rather than just through acquisition.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
one generation is looking at bigger is always better, and
Right,
the
right.
generation behind is saying we need to get better, not bigger. So,
Interesting. Yeah.
right. So
Huh.
there's a lot of tension points just when you watch generations navigate because of history, what they know, what they learned, what they experienced. And so, yeah, the world of farm succession planning is dynamic, to say the least.
Mhm. Yeah, it's in theory, it seems multifaceted, but even just to hear you describe those two aspects of it, you're like, I don't understand that. This is there's way more to this. There's a lot going on below the surface that
Absolutely.
I don't think we're
Absolutely.
sussing out.
Mike,
Well,
I wonder if there is, and maybe you've given this some thought, but just in our conversation here, I wonder if there's some room in or an opportunity there with veterans to engage active military personnel
Yeah, there
with
are.
this transition piece, much like, you know, those of us who are involved in the succession planning world are engaging farmers at an early age to have this discussion, like Rena said, that she's just such an expert at that. And it kind of helps that individual to begin to think about what those options are
Mhm.
rather than just having this cold stop and then trying to figure out, scramble around really, and trying to figure out where we fit into
Yeah,
this. Is there an opportunity to work there with active military personnel, or maybe there's already groups that are doing that?
yeah.
I don't
I'm
know.
really glad you brought that up, Ron. There's one program in particular, and then I'll give you an example.
Okay.
The program is called the DoD, or Department of Defense Skills Bridge Program, and essentially it's an internship, and it allows private sector companies to um, apply for and be a part of this program where it's 6 months. An active duty service member basically becomes a free intern for this company, whichever company it is. The big ones, most of the big ones have some form of this type of program, but the DoD still pays that person's salary, right? But because they're transitioning out of their active duty role, they have a little bit more time. Um, they intern with this company for a 6 month period. And at the end, there's no obligation to hire at the end. The success rate of hiring, I think, is north of 80%. However, right, it's still pretty high that they end up becoming staff members or employees there. But that's exactly the opportunity is, can we begin to bring these opportunities to the veteran or the active duty service member before they even become veterans? Yes, absolutely, that's the case. The story is there's a National Guard base in Camp San Luis Obispo, California. It's 2,500 acres. There is also a school in California, other coast. The school is called the Naval Postgraduate School, and it's a B billet school or a secondary school. You have deployment time or active duty service, or you're in a unit where you can deploy and then you're back for a B billet in the States. And then you go back to a deployment unit and then you're back in a B billet. So you kind of do this ping pong thing. The school is in one of the B billets or stateside times. And this major is Eric Chia, Czaja is his last name. He's an active duty Army Special Forces major. And he went through the Naval Postgraduate School with a thesis of, can we use cattle to manage DoD land, right? The Department of Defense owns 26 million acres of land that surround these bases all over the country. 13 million of those acres, half, belong to the U.S. Army. So he went in with this wild idea of using cattle to manage this land instead of either using conventional management practices. He's focused on AMP grazing, or using that land just becomes fallow and it's not for production, and you've got to cut it and manage the brush, and it's sort of this burden instead of this benefit. So he went through that. That was his thesis at NPS, or the Naval Postgraduate School. Now he's a faculty member at NPS, and he is, to my knowledge and to his, the only active duty Army officer in the entire U.S. Army whose sole job it is to manage these 140 cow-calf pairs in Camp San Luis Obispo on 2,500 acres for the next 2 years. His whole job is to move these cattle once a day and show the benefits of AMP grazing. And
Wow.
he has no farming background. The two producers that had been managing this land for the last 30 years, he built a relationship with, and he said, hey guys, he's been to the Soil Health Academy training events, so he's been educated through those kinds of folks. But he said, hey, I want to try this crazy thing. I want to put these 140 cow-calf pairs on really small plots of land, and I want to move them every day, and I want to use polywire to do it instead of barbed wire. And they said, I don't know. He goes, come on, just let me try. Just let me try. And so he spent 3 or 4 days with a bale of hay and an acre of pasture, training the cattle on the wire first. And they said, okay, really responsive to him. Come cow, they come across the line. And over the last 3 or 4 months, the changes in the ecological environment around what he has done, those producers over the last 30 years have never seen. He said, we are seeing these cattle eat things that we've never seen them eat. We've seen turkey and deer in areas we've never seen them before. And of course, Eric is like, well, this is business as usual for me. Like, I've seen this for the last 2.5 months. This is common. And these producers who have been run this land for decades have said, whoa, these cattle are healthier. They're managing this land in a much more efficient way than we've ever done it. And he said, okay, well, Camp Roberts is an hour and a half northwest up the coast. It's 40,000 acres. He goes, can we do the same thing there? Can we bring cattle up there, and can we do AMP grazing there? And so first of all, I think he's right? I think what he's doing is correct already. But I go, if you can prove this to other bases and other elements of the military service, this could be huge. Potentially even, right? Not only are we managing this land better, it's becoming a benefit instead of a burden. But oh, by the way, if now service members can consume those cattle, now you've got a food secure installation, or at least the beginnings of a food secure installation. Bring in containerized ag, grow vegetables on the base itself, drill wells. I mean, now these become bastions of food production security elements instead of those that require external resources.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what he's doing is awesome. And I think that he's on the precipice of something huge, which is why he was on the guest on the show a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
That's
That's really cool.
Awesome.
It's really cool.
Wow.
Plus the military
Incredible.
might be cranking out some farmers too while we're at
I mean, he goes, I love it. That's my job now every day. I get out on the side-by-side or the 4x4 and man, I go move these cows around. He goes, I can't ask for a better job. I'm like,
That's
yeah,
really cool. That's
It's
really
awesome.
cool.
Fascinating.
Well, Mike, this has been such a fascinating, and thank you again for giving us so much of your time this morning. I mean, we talked about 2 incredibly cool topics today.
Wow.
And I
Super
appreciate that so
insightful.
much. Yeah, appreciate that so much, and really appreciate what you're doing on both fronts. One, making sure that great ideas get to market, because that is so needed, and it's really sad when entrepreneurs have something that could really be a game changer and they just simply cannot figure out how to navigate the commercial side of it. So thank you for your work that you're doing there. And then also just thank you for creating the pathways for people to be able to, find a passion and find a place where they can really excel and find purpose after they have donated so much of their time to keeping us all safe. And that is just an amazing calling. And I'm so thankful that you're doing that as well. So just 2 incredibly cool things that you're contributing to the world. So thank you.
No question.
Yeah. Thank you guys for the opportunity here.
Yeah.
Really.
It would be very unlike us if we didn't at least wrap up this podcast with our requisite trivia question. And I almost feel like the trivia question is now the big letdown of the podcast, because I mean, we've just talked about so many cool things. I don't even know how to make this transition, quite frankly, but we're going to do it anyway.
All right.
Because somebody out there, if we don't, is going to get a hold of me and go, why didn't you ask that guy a trivia question? So
Here we go.
Here is what we have. We have I only have one today, and it is about ag tech. So if you were to guess, what is the value of the ag tech market in the United States as of the end of 2024?
It's in the billions.
That is correct. It is in the billions.
In the billions. You want like an actual number?
Just give me a ballpark. You can even give me a range.
2 to 4.
Okay. Ron, what would you say?
I'm going to say 8 to 10.
Okay. It is per Google, so we always have to be a little suspect of my data,
Right.
but per Google, it is $11 billion.
Oh,
Just a lot of billions. Now,
it doesn't happen very much, Mike.
just for fun and just to encourage Mike, because according to this number, he has a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
What is it estimated to reach by 2030?
Oh, I think the CAGR's in like the mid-teens, so 15 to 18% more than that. I don't do math in public, so you'll have to break a calculator out. It's 11, I don't know, 20 something maybe not quite that high, maybe 18.
Ron, you want to throw a guess at it?
I am going to throw a guess out there. I think that because of the exponential nature of the beast, I'm going to say over 50 billion.
Woo!
Hey, now again, per Google,
Uh-huh.
it is estimated to reach $79.7 billion by 2030. So that's why I'm saying, Mike, you and your team better be ready. That's a lot of tech.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. It's always sort of hard to see the forest through the trees, right? And I'm usually in the forest quite regularly. And so it feels common to me, but it's interesting to sort of step back and say, this is what it is, but this is what it's projected to be. I mean, 7 times or close to 7 times what it is now in the next 10 years. Like, I wonder how much of that will be driven by AI-based technologies.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think a majority insteed of a minority.
Yeah. You might have to go have a conversation with ChatGPT and see what she says.
Yeah.
What does ChatGPT think she's going to be able to accomplish?
She got bet
my
against
goodness.
herself.
Well, Mike, again, thank you so much for your time this morning. This was fantastic. We can't wait to see all the amazing things you do. And I actually have a couple of people that I'll send your way as potential guests for you, that are veterans in ag that I've had the privilege to work with, and they've got great stories, which I'm sure you find all the time. I'll send them your way.
Please. Thank you so much.
All right.
Appreciate you, Mike. Thanks for doing all the great work that you do. And we'll look forward to a conversation in the future again.
Yeah, that'd be great, guys. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
And if any of you who are listening do have an interest on being on Mike's podcast, we will have links to connect with him. And again, if you're an inventor and would like to talk about getting some commercialization help, we will put all of Mike's contact information and his websites and podcast links in the show notes. So please do check him out. Make sure that you reach out to him, and we will look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Ag Inspo podcast with Ron Rabou and Rena Striegel. Find Ag Inspo on Farm Journal's YouTube channel and anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. For more information about today's guest or the resources referenced today, please see the show notes listed below. Join us next time when we will meet another inspirational leader who has taken those small steps to bring about really big change.